Hey everyone, welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. If you're a Monty Python fan, you'll recognize this little clip.
And now something completely different.
Yep, time for something completely different. Recently I had a birthday, and kind of a bit of a personal tradition for me is if I'm at home, which isn't often, I like to go for a run or a hike or really go and get some really good exercise that day. It's kind of my treat to myself is like that day I'm just going to go and really get some great exercise that day, a little beyond what I normally be able to fit into a normal day. And really the purpose is mental health more than physical health. It's just a time for me to be by myself and think. For an introvert like me, just spending time by myself is really important. And I really like that time just to kind of think. So while I was out hiking in the woods just recently, a few days ago or last week or wherever it was, I started making notes about things I'd like to talk about and share with you. That's when I thought I'd do one of these podcast episodes by myself with no guest. So here goes. Like I said, time for something completely different. One of the things I was thinking about was I think I'm just like most drivers, maybe even you, in that I wasn't born with anything special in terms of natural driving talent. Hey, I'm not Ayrton Senna. And by the way, I don't not. This is not meant to say that you're not Ayrton Senna, weren't born with something special. But I think that I was kind of born with what most people have, and I've had to work hard, really hard, at learning what I've learned and being able to do what I've been able to do in terms of driving. I guess that work and that effort and everything I put into it, it led to me driving Indy cars and winning in, sports cars, IMSA, Daytona 24, the U.S. Road Racing Championship one year and all that kind of stuff. So, I got to race at a very, very high level, and I had a chance to drive at tracks all over the world and, all sorts of cars. Bottom line is I've learned a ton. And, I guess I should also just give you a quick version of how I got into the sport, because I think it puts into perspective some of what I have to say and what I teach and what I share with other drivers. So my dad took me to my first race when I was 5 years old. And from that time until I started racing a dozen years later or so, just about all I thought about was racing. I think I really learned to read when a friend's older brother gave me a stack of old road and track magazines. I learned to draw by sketching out racetracks and the lines that I drive around them. I learned to write by turning in homework assignments about racing. I know my teachers probably wondered about me. Well, no, I know they did. I learned about math and physics by thinking through how everything applied to racing. My whole life was around that. That's all I was. What's the word? Obsessed, addicted at a very early age. And, I spent most weekends with my dad at the local oval track as he built and prepared race cars for a few different drivers. By the time I was 10, I can remember sitting in the grandstands at a local oval track, a 3/8 mile oval track, watching my dad's super modifieds. We were running super modifieds and sprint cars, primarily on paved oval tracks and in the Northwest. And, so we would go to different racetracks and different oval tracks in the Northwest all over the place. And I can remember being 10 years old and sitting in the stands, and I could predict the passing moves that the cars on the track in front of me would make. I could say, hey, car 33, he's starting back here, but I know he's faster, and that driver's really experienced. And what he likes to do is he likes to make passes diving down the inside going into turn 1, or he would set up a pass on the outside of turn 4, or, and I knew all these drivers. I knew the cars. And I watched them, and I studied how they would set up a pass. And the one thing about short track oval racing is drivers set up passes, well in advance. It might take them 10 laps to make a pass, but they set it up and they work it and they work it and they work it. And, like I said, by the time I was 10, I could sit in the stands And I think there were probably a couple of adults around me that go, who is this kid? Because, I'd go, watch 33. He's going to make a pass 4 laps from now, and he's going to do it on the outside going into turn 2. I guess, like I said, that's all I did was I thought about, I studied, everything was about racing. And then I went racing, and very shortly after that, I started instructing driving, and I learned to be a better driver by teaching, instructing, and coaching other drivers. So that's the background. And, I guess what I was thinking about when I was out on my hike, I was thinking about what's worked for me. What are some of the big lessons? And, it's hard for me to separate, I guess it's hard for me to separate what I've learned from driving and what I've learned from coaching. So I'm not going to bother separating them, I guess. And by the way, what I talk about here is far from a complete list. It's just, I guess, think about it as me just kind of a brain dump of some ideas that started while I was out on a hike on my birthday. So I guess my birthday gift to me is giving some thoughts to you to think about. And I actually want to start with kind of a very conceptual thing in some ways, but I just finished writing something and preparing to send it out in an email to people. It's what I call the learning formula. And the formula is basically it's MI, which stands for mental image, plus A, which stands for awareness, leads or equals your goal. So MI plus A equals G. And again, mental image plus awareness leads to your goal. And here's the background on it. Years ago, I was coaching a young driver in a Formula 2000 car, and we were on an oval track in Lakeland, Florida. And I think that track, I think it's gone away now, but I'm trying to remember, but I think it was a three-quarter mile oval track, maybe 7/8, but I think it was 3/4 mile oval track. And for anybody on an oval track, the very first time they're on an oval track, because he'd come from road racing, and the biggest challenge that a lot of drivers face is feeling comfortable driving on a track surrounded by concrete walls. You're in a spindly little Formula car, and you're coming out of the corner, your foot flat to the floor, and the car is just on that ragged edge coming out, and it's coming out towards the wall, and you can't help it. Human instinct is stay away from that wall. And that's what this driver was doing. And the driver would hold the car, at least a car's width. Sometimes it would start to get down a little closer, but mostly about a car's width away from the wall. And when you do that, you basically have to scrub speed because you're not unwinding the wheel. You're not letting the car run free. You're not freeing the car up and taking the scrub out of the car as you come out of the corner. And it delays you being able to get back to power. So, I'm telling the driver, unwind the wheel, release the car, use more track, let the car come right off the wall. And I kept telling the driver that over and over and over again, and nothing really changed. And so, I knew the value of mental imagery, visualization. And so I'd learned that actually playing sports, primarily in a little tangent here. When I was in junior high school, I was in my phys ed teacher's office and saw a magazine that had an article about visualization. And I took the magazine home and read about visualization. And it changed my life because I started using visualization for the other sports I was playing. I played a lot of basketball and volleyball and all the usual stuff, but a lot of tennis. And I used visualization, mental imagery for improving my tennis game. And so I knew the value of visualization, mental imagery. So I took the driver, we went into the trailer, and I asked him to close his eyes and relax and get into that very relaxed with the mind, very receptive, and think about imagining unwinding the wheel and coming out and having the car just track out just right out close to the edge of the track, but hard on the throttle, car right on the edge, just dancing out there. And I had him do it over and over and over and over again. And the great thing about an oval is you get around it pretty quick. So in a very short period of time, he could see himself every time he exited turn 2 onto the back straight and turn 4 onto the front straight, just unwinding the wheel and letting the car run free. And I thought, great, fantastic. Let's go back on track. Let's go. He gets back on track, and guess what? Nothing changed. He continued to keep the car's width away or so from the wall. And again, human instinct, survival, stay away from that concrete wall. So, I couldn't blame him for it in some ways, but that's what happened. And as we spent time, and I was kind of frustrated a little bit going, why? Like mental imagery, you get that clear mental image of doing something, it should help you, it should help you get to doing what you want to do. And yet it wasn't quite working here. So, and then it just dawned on me, and as the driver was going around, unfortunately, we had two-way radio communication. I was sitting up high in the grandstands watching down so I could see the line that he was driving. And I got on the radio, and as he came out of the corner onto the front straightaway, I just said to him, "How close to the wall were you?" And actually, the first time I don't think he even responded. Came out on the back straight. I said, "How close to the wall were you?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I said, "So just tell me next lap." So he came out on the front straight. I said, "How close?" And he said, "Car's width." And come out of turn 2. How close? 4 feet. Come out on the front straightaway. How close? 2 feet. How close to the wall were you coming out of turn 2? 1 foot. And I said, "Great, keep it there." And within a few laps, all of a sudden, it was there. And it really hit me that day. And I'll be honest, kind of this, wow, what did I just learn here? From a learning perspective, what did I learn as a coach to help a driver? And it was actually kind of sitting on the plane flying home that I wrote this: mental imagery plus awareness leads to the goal. And that's kind of where I came up with this little formula of MI plus A equals G. And I have used that to this day, practically every day of my life, thinking about whenever I want to learn something, whenever I'm working with a driver, I'm thinking, do they have a clear mental image of what they want to accomplish? And are they aware of where they are right now in relation to that? Because if a driver has both that clear mental image and an awareness of where they are in relationship, it's like the brain does this kind of magic, says, come on, bring them together. And the brain says, body, do what it takes to make that happen. And I've used this, and I've had drivers that, they come out of the corner and, on a road course, whatever, and, I can see that the tires are getting within a foot or two of the exit curbing. And, I can say, unwind the wheel, release the car, use up all the track, all that kind of stuff. But if I just say, how close are you to the edge of the track? It's amazing how quickly the driver will then start to use more track. So that was a big kind of aha moment in my life. And I've been using that technique in coaching. It's kind of one of my key strategies. And one of the things I think that has helped me be successful as a coach is helping drivers make sure that they have a very clear mental image of what they want to accomplish and an awareness right now in comparison to what that mental image is. And by the way, I think there are some drivers who they're very aware of what they are doing right now. In fact, they can tell you everything they're doing wrong, but they don't have a clear enough mental image of what it is, the detail, the senses, the sensory details of what does the goal look like? What is that perfect? What does it look like? And if a driver takes the time to do mental imagery of that helps them. And other drivers, they're very clear on what they're trying to accomplish, but their awareness of where they are right now is not very clear. And by simply asking, if I'm asking them or if they ask themselves, where am I in relationship to that? How am I doing? How am I getting back on the throttle? Where am I looking? Could I look farther ahead? Could I be smoother with the throttle? Could I be better with the brake release? It helps build that awareness by asking those questions. So that learning formula has been just a massive, major aha moment in my life. It's one of those things people go, oh, you should trademark that. Oh, by the way, I guess if somebody listening to this goes, oh, I'm going to go and trademark that. Come on, give me a break, would you? Anyway, so that was a big aha moment, and I kind of wanted to share that. The other, kind of a technique perspective, that a driving technique perspective, it was the day that I really realized, learned how important the brake release is and how it is more important than when I start braking. And I remember reading Jackie Stewart's book, Principles of High Performance Driving, many years ago. And in the book, he says the reason why he won more Grand Prix in his day, obviously not as many as Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton now have, but in his day, he won more Grand Prix races than anybody else. And he said, The reason for that was because of how he let off the brake. And I can remember reading that and going, wow, that's interesting. But what does that mean? And it wasn't until years later, and it was actually, working with Colin Brown. Many of you call him Braun because that's kind of the way Braun, but he pronounces his name Brown. But working with Colin, who is, a kid who's now no longer a kid, but I started working with him when he was 12, 13 years old. And it was when he was racing in Daytona prototype cars and then going into NASCAR and, being a pro race driver at the age of 17. But working with Colin, and it was kind of a mutual discovery of the phrase, it's the timing and rate of release of the brakes that makes the difference. And by timing, I mean timing in relationship to when you start to turn in the corner. So the timing could be you start to release before you turn in, right as you turn in, or after you turn in. And then the rate of release is simply that. Is it a quick release? Is it a very slow release of the brake pedal? And if you manage that timing and rate of release of the brakes just right, you end up carrying just a little bit more entry speed, get the car rotated, pointed where you want, and get out of the corner and start accelerating from a higher speed. And that, when people say, what is it that the very best drivers in the world do? I say, the very best, if there's one thing that separates them from the less than best, it's the timing and rate of release of the brake pedal. So from a technique perspective, that is, I guess, the major aha thing in terms of a technique. Of course, if any of you listened to the podcast just a few episodes ago, a two-parter that I did with Mike Zemicki, who's just a great coach and fellow coach, pretty much the theme of the whole podcast episodes were there are no absolutes, there are no rules. And, I think Mike and I ranted on for quite a while about different myths and misperceptions and things that people say, oh, you must do it this way. And there are no absolutes, there are no rules. There are a lot of guidelines. There are things. In fact, actually, I guess I should clarify. There are some rules. Really, I guess they're laws, actually. They're the laws of physics. The one thing that is true every single time are the laws of physics. How we work with the laws of physics, that's a whole other matter because, you'll get some drivers that say, never trail brake. Other drivers say, always trail brake. You get some that say, the most important corner is this one. And the others say, no, it's this one. And you know what? There's exceptions to every single rule. So, in the beginning, I think, like every other driver, I started reading books and I started, pre-internet, long before the internet. But, I tried to get my hands on everything I possibly could to learn. And I guess in the beginning, I drove by the book. And, I've written a few books and I've had drivers tell me that, oh, on page 73, you said I should do this. And that's what I do. And I'm like, okay, but don't take things too literal. Like, what I've written are not laws. They're guidelines, and they work more often than they don't. But there are always exceptions to the rule. So, I think, that was another kind of a lesson was, we started off doing things by the book, and then we kind of got to start to develop our own deeper understanding of what we do, and then kind of adapt and learn and become better because of that. Another thing I was actually thinking about this, and this was, when you're out on a hike and you're in the middle of the woods, fortunately now I have a smartphone, like we all do, right? I really should go on a hike and not take it with me, but I get out there and I start thinking of things, and I almost wanted to stop and actually draw pictures, and I actually kind of stopped on a little ledge, and I was almost sketching out a little graph on a log there. I should have taken a photo of that, but the idea is there's this kind of reverse relationship between experience and the importance of a car's performance. And what I mean by that is, well, the bottom line is usually there's more to be gained by focusing on one's driving than on tweaking the car. But, I kind of, in my mind, and, one bad thing about a podcast is it's not visual, but in my mind, I kind of drew this graph where, like, along the bottom of the graph on the x-axis, where was experience. So from the beginning to no experience to very experienced, and then on the y-axis was the importance of a car's performance to the results. And in the beginning, I would say that the importance of the car is minor, barely a blip on the graph. As a driver's experience level grows, increases, the graph kind of goes up and the importance of the car goes up. So, like I said, there's this relationship between experience and importance. And, I guess the reason I bring this up is I've often seen drivers, particularly early on, who get so caught up in I'm going to put on these tires, and I'm going to change these brake pads, and then I'm going to change the sway bar, and then I'm going to put different shocks in the car, and I'm going to do this to increase the horsepower, and it's like, just if you're really interested in getting the maximum performance out of the driver/car package, then focus more on your driving and tweak your driving as opposed to tweaking the car. So, I think anybody listening to the podcast kind of buys into that concept, but we can't help it. We can't help but want to look at the car and go, well, I could pay $1,000 and put some stickier tires in the car and go faster. Yeah, but those tires are going to wear out, and if you find something in your driving, that is never going to wear out. So, but having said that, if you are going to tweak the car's handling, if you're going to work on the car's handling and the setup and everything, the most important part of that is getting really clear on what the problem is, defining what that problem is. And again, I see drivers often, they come in off the track and go, I'm going to change the tire pressures, or I'm going to, soften the rear shock settings, or I'm going to change my anti-roll bar on the front or something like that. And I go, well, why? And they go, well, the car is, it's oversteered a little bit. And I'm like, where? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, in turn 9. Okay, so where in turn 9? What do you mean? And, well, where? Like on the entry, in the middle of the corner, on the exit as you're getting? Actually on the exit. Okay, so what are you doing at that moment in time? Are you unwinding the wheel? Are you still holding the wheel in one place? Have you fed in the throttle? Are you at full throttle yet? Oh, okay. So going through that process, and I by the way, I'll give my sales pitch. Here's a sales pitch for something that I give away for free. If you go to my website, there's an ebook that I put out just fairly recently. How to Tune Your Car's Handling, a driver's guide. And if you just go to my website, you can go and download it for free. And it's got that, basically that handling debrief process. And I think that is, when I started to use that, the answer to what should I do to improve my car's handling became much simpler to answer that question. So starting with that is really important. So, having said that, the same thing can be said up for driving. That's the other thing, is the more time I spent as a driver getting super clear on what I needed to do, the easier it got to improve. So, taking the time to debrief with myself or with a coach or, another driver, whoever, just taking the time to really sit down, ideally with a track map, making notes and going, this is what I'm doing now, this is what I'd like to do. How am I going to go from here to there? Kind of the MI plus A thing kind of fits into that. And the more time I spent doing that, the easier it became to go and make those changes. So same kind of thing. Identify the problem, the issue, whatever you want to call that. That I think is it's critical. Okay, another thing that I was reminded of while I was out on my hike was, this is something that I've talked to a lot of drivers about, and it's kind of a dangerous thing to talk about, and that is mistakes. Obviously, making a mistake when you're playing tennis, okay, so you knock the ball into the net, or you lobbed it over the fence. You got to go and you got to go get the ball. Okay, big mistake. Maybe a mistake is you fall down and you bash your knee, whatever. Okay, on the track, mistakes are a little bit more serious and there's more consequences. But the thing is, the more we try to avoid mistakes, the more we stop really trying to, like, I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm not going to make that mistake. And maybe the classic simple one is, you turn in, let's say, a little bit late for a corner, and now you recognize, oh, I'm going to be wide of the apex by 3 or 4 feet, a meter away from the apex. And so you've made a mistake. So then you go, I'm going to force it down to the apex, and you put more wheel in it, you force the car down, and you grind some speed off, you scrub some speed off, getting there, and you try to get down to that, but all you end up doing is scrubbing off speed and actually increase the chance of spinning the car. Because if you just kind of recognized and went, you know what, I missed that apex, I'm just going to let the car run free out of here. And you run a little wider around there, and it delays you getting back to throttle. Okay. And that's where I go, you know what, that's not a mistake, that's a learning take. And that was when I started to change my thinking around that. That was another aha moment for me. So just thinking about that in terms of, I think we've all heard this, is that, if you make a mistake on the track, it's not like you can go back and fix it. You just have to wait until you get to it the next lap around. And yet sometimes we're so caught up in I got to fix that mistake, we cause more mistakes. And I would say that most drivers who crash or go off the track or have a spin, usually it's not that mistake right there. The mistake actually happened 1, 2, 3 moments, sectors, corners, techniques before that. It's something that's a little mistake, and that led to another one, and the driver didn't correct that mistake or tried to fix the mistake right then, and because of that, they caused a bigger one later. So sometimes it's just accepting the fact that you're going to make mistakes. Accept it. And the less you force yourself not to make those mistakes, the more accepting you are of them, the more you think about them as learning takes, the better off you're going to be. So something else that kind of another big aha moment was, the more I focused on my own performance, that the better I got. And the better I got, the more I won. And that's when I realized that focusing on winning didn't work for me as well as focusing on the process that would lead to a better performance and ultimately getting the result I wanted. And, I got to say, got to tell you, I am a super competitive person. Somebody says, who's the most competitive? I will put my hand up first, because I'm going to beat you to say that I'm more competitive than you. I'm a very competitive person. But I've had to learn how to manage that. And that was very tough for me. It was tough for me to kind of learn and accept that the more I focused on the performance, the better the result was going to be. And I'll leave it right there, but I'll also say that it's something that I continue to work on every day of my life. I think sometimes we go, oh, it's great to be competitive. And yes, it is to some extent. But it's learning how to manage that is important. Being adaptable. This is an interesting one, because being adaptable in terms of, I would say that being adaptable, it's more important than being fast, and it applies to many areas. The obvious is adapting to different cars. To be a great driver, the better you are at adapting to whatever car you get into, the better you are. Also, if your car has a handling problem or some other kind of problem, if you can adapt to it, that makes you a better driver. But I'd also say that being adaptable with my mindset, and specifically with my behavioral traits, and I'm going to touch on this for a moment here. Maybe you have done one of those Myers-Briggs, profiles or one of those other personality trait profiles. Myers-Briggs, Berkman, Performax, PDP. There's a bunch of them out there. Basically, they ask you a bunch of questions and comes back and says your behavioral traits are this. And I can remember going through a training program one time that sort of told me, this is your behavioral traits, your personality traits. And it said, that's kind of who you are. And what I've learned from racing is I can adapt those traits. And, as an example, first of all, I am probably the biggest introvert you'll ever meet in your life. And yet, to be successful as a professional race car driver, there were times where I needed to get out there. And I needed to put myself out there in pretty uncomfortable situations, like staying in front of very, very large groups of people and talking to them and doing media stuff and working with groups of people. And that was way, way, way outside of my comfort zone. But I spent a lot of time doing mental imagery of me going from my natural kind of introverted, I want to be by myself kind of way, and taking this knob on my chest and kind of cranking it up and going, okay, here I am. I'm Mr. Extrovert, and I'm going to be out there, and I'm going to be, networking and doing all this stuff. And I would do that. And yes, at the end of the day, I'd be worn out because mentally it would stress me a little bit. Not stress me a little bit. It stressed me a lot. But I could do it, and I adapted my traits that way. The other thing was, naturally, I'm a very, very impatient person. I always have to remind myself when I'm talking here, slow down. But I'm impatient to get all this stuff out to you guys. Like I want to share everything. And yeah, okay, I'll slow down here. I can be I'm naturally an impatient person. But to be a coach, especially, there are times where you have to be patient. As a driver, there are times where you have to be patient. And I think, it's weird that we take up a sport, that I would take up a sport that's all about speed and going fast. That kind of fit my impatient nature. But what I had to learn was there's a time and a place to be patient on the track. And whether it's that, a little bit of patience here so I can get a better exit of the corner over there, that's an example. As a coach, I've had to learn how to do that. So again, I've done a lot of mental imagery to change my mental programming around that. And that has been probably, I'm going to say, one of the most valuable life lessons for me is being able to adapt my personality or behavioral traits, my mindset. What I would love is for somebody to say, is Ross a patient person or an impatient person? Is he an outgoing extrovert or kind of a more of an introverted person? And have people go, I don't know, because that tells me that I've been able to adapt to the situation. And obviously through life, we learn how to do a lot of that. But there are times when you can take the time to spend and do that in a very deliberate way. And that's what I did through racing. Racing kind of forced me to do that. It was either do that or not get the opportunities that I wanted to have, and probably not win or to go and race where I got to race. So that was really important. And it leads to, one of my favorite phrases is, we do what we do because we're programmed to do so. And we don't do what we want sometimes, either because we don't have the right programming, the right mental programming, or sometimes we access the wrong programming. So, for example, for me, heel and toe downshifting is a mental program that I do not think about. It is a habit. It happens. Why? Because I spent hours and days and weeks and months practicing it over and over and over and over again. And then I was in a situation where, doing a lot of at-track instructing, I was in a different car. Like, I'd drive 20 different cars on a day on the track, and I needed to adapt my ability to heel and toe in anything. So I've got programming, the right mental programming for heel and toe. Some drivers do not. And, and even still, when I think about it, there was a time in my life where I didn't know what heel and toe was. Then there was a time where it was kind of like, okay, I've heard about it, I've read about it, now I got to go and practice it. And you're probably nodding your head here right now and kind of going, oh, I remember the first time I did heel and toe, it's all jerky and your foot slipping off the pedals and, who knows whatever happens, right? And something you think through in the very beginning, and it's a very conscious thing, and you think it through and think it through and think it through, and then eventually you stop thinking about it and you just do. So that is something that's become a program. And I say sometimes we access the wrong program. If you have ever gone to shift from second gear to third gear, but you missed third and you went to fifth, you just accessed the wrong mental program. Worse would be going the other direction, maybe trying to catch fourth gear. You got second gear, overrev the engine. Whoop. Hopefully don't do that. But one of the reasons that I've been able to improve my driving throughout my life is that I've been very deliberate about what and how I practice. And I program the right stuff. Hey, I'm fanatical about when I'm driving on the street, I drive with hands at 9 and 3. Why? Because I want that to be the habit. I want that to be by default. And, if you think about it, when you're on track and the pressure is on, what do you rely on? You rely on your habits, your mental programming. And if your mental programming is to hold the steering wheel with one hand, you're going to try to steer out of a slide with one hand. And I think you would agree with me, hopefully, that that's not the best way. You're not going to have the maximum amount of control that way. So that programming, and by the way, obviously what I'm talking about here is a lot of mental imagery, or what we typically call visualization, but using it in a very deliberate way. And if you notice, I talked about mental imagery in terms of a technique like heel and toe, but I also use mental imagery for changing or adapting my behavioral or personality traits. I've used it for changing just my mindset in terms of I'm going to be patient now. Now I'm not going to be patient. And so we can use it for a lot of what we call the mental stuff. That kind of stuff that we don't want to talk about. Well, we can use it for changing our programming there as well. So that is critical. And like I said, I told the story about picking up a magazine off my phys ed teacher's desk and reading about visualization. And that really changed my life, because I've used that in a deliberate way. I don't know. I mean, I bet I haven't gone 2 days in a row over the past, 50 years, without doing a deliberate mental imagery session. Whether it's just, getting into bed and going, as I'm going to sleep, I'm going to mentally image what I'm going to do tomorrow, or how I'm going to coach that driver the next time we're at track, or how I'm going to drive turn 3, or how I'm going to crank my personality up the next time I'm in a group of people. So I've used it in a very deliberate way. And, I don't know of a high performer that doesn't use that in some way. But I also know that it's one of those things that the more deliberate you use it, the more often you use it, the better you're going to get. Okay, I touched on this a little bit earlier about when I was talking about when Mike Zemicki and I were on the podcast, and we were talking about there are no rules, there are guidelines. And one of the pieces of advice, and one of the very first books that I ever read about driving was Alan Johnson's Driving in Competition, and he broke corners down into 3 different types: ones that lead onto a straightaway, one at the end of a straightaway, and corners that are in between corners. And man, that is such a great foundation, and it was a great foundation for me. But I think that advice of the most important corner is the one leading on the longest straightaway, I believe that is way oversimplified. And, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it here. All I'm going to say is, if you focus all your time and attention on that one corner leading on the longest straightaway, just go right ahead, please. Because in the meantime, I, or the driver that I'm coaching, is going to prioritize the track, and we will consider that corner, but we're also going to consider the fastest and the scariest, most intimidating corner. And we're also going to consider the sections of the track that we spend the most time in. And in doing that, 9 times out of 10, we're going to come up with a better priority list. And we may just end up getting a slight advantage over you if all you think about is, that corner leads on the longest straightaway. That's the most important one. Now, hey, don't get me wrong. That corner is very important. It is super important that you get a good exit out of corners that lead on the long straights. Super important. I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but it can be overdone. So that was I followed again. As I said, I drove by the book for a while, and that was one of my rules that I lived my driving life by. And then I started to realize, there's more to this than just that long, or that corner that leads on the longest straightaway. An example, turn 2 at Thunder Hill, the carousel at Road America. You spend so much time in those corners. They're so fast, and they can be intimidating, and they lead to big chunks of lap time. So think about that. I'll just plant that little seed with you. I often get drivers that will ask me, and typically these are drivers who maybe they're newer to the sport, so they're looking for, they're looking for the silver bullet, and they'll ask the question, what is it that, a Lewis Hamilton does? And I often say that, Lewis Hamilton, that he brakes with his nose and he turns the steering wheel with his left kneecap, don't you? No, the thing is that the very best drivers, all they do is they do the basics better than everybody else. Lewis Hamilton doesn't do anything different from you or me. He just does what we all do that little bit better, or maybe a lot better in some cases. But we know the sport is it football is a game of inches? Well, racing is a game of thousandths of a second and fractions of a millimeter, right? So it's all those tiny little pieces. It constantly amazes me. And to this day, after having been in the sport all my life, where you can get two drivers in reasonably equal cars go around a racetrack, let's say the lap time is 1:30, and the two of them will go around there in 1:30.014, and the other one will go around in 0.017, 3/1000th of a second different. And you go, how many things did they do different in that one lap? And yet it's different in the lap time. But it's so close together at the same time. So it's it's one of the reasons why I love this sport so much. But if you're looking for the trick, the trick advanced stuff that the best drivers do, it's just doing the basics better. And sometimes I think we try to skip over those basics and try to get to something advanced. And yet we should just go back and really focus on the basics. And every single time I get on track, I kind of remind myself, stick to the basics, keep it simple. So, and one of the things that also comes up a lot is this whole idea of why is there some drivers, and maybe this kind of goes back to my comment in the beginning of, I don't think I was born with anything special, but why is a Lewis Hamilton, can he just sense the limits of the car better than Valtteri Bottas? Or, is Max Verstappen that much better at sensing the limits of the car than Alex Albon? Was he born with that? And we could argue all day long or talk all day long about how much somebody is born with and how much somebody is not born with. What I know for a fact, because I've seen it, I've experienced it myself, drivers I've worked with, we can improve our ability to sense the limits of the car and the tires. And the sensory input sessions that I always recommend, and I'm not going to get into the details of it here because I've talked about it many times in the books and all the other stuff that I've got out there. But doing sensory input sessions, so basically we're practicing in a very deliberate way to become more sensitive to what the car and tires are telling us about where the limits are. And that is the most important coaching tool that I've ever discovered and used. It's, when I get into a car to this day, when I'm get a chance to go and drive again, I start off by really thinking about, what do I see? What do I really see? What more can I take in with my vision? What do I feel? If I really focus on, do I feel the motions of the car? Do I feel the feedback through the wheel, through the pedals? Do I feel the G-forces building? Do I feel the bumps in the track, the surface changes? What do I hear? Do I hear the sound of the engine, the brakes, the gearbox, the tires, the wind rushing past the car? Do I hear that? And what if I really take some time to really focus on those things, I've just become more sensitive to that. And now I'm better at sensing the limits of that car. And sometimes somebody will say, well, you're pretty quick at learning a new track and adapting. And I'd say that is the reason why, because I can very quickly go into that mode of I'm just going to focus on taking in more sensory information, give my brain more to work with. Okay, speaking of giving my brain, my mind more to work with, one of my favorite sayings is there's always more. Every driver that I've ever worked with, driver could put the car in the pole, win the race by lapping the entire field, set track record, win everything in sight. My response is, there's always more. What do we do next? How do we improve? And, I was very fortunate a number of years ago to connect with Dr. Carol Dweck, professor of psychology at Stanford University. And she's the author of the book Mindset, one of my favorite books. And we actually did a small study of high performance and race drivers, looking at whether they had what Carol calls a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Growth being there's always more to learn, and our brains can always adapt and change and learn more. And a fixed mindset is, well, I was born with this, that's what I've got. When we compare the results of this study that kind of group people into growth or fixed mindset, when we compare those results with some, I would say kind of some of my relatively subjective ratings of success on track, looking at drivers and saying this driver is successful, this one's less successful, it was obvious the drivers with a growth mindset consistently always performed better and got better results. And, obviously it makes sense. The more open we are to learning, the more we improve. The more we improve, the better the results we get. The better results we get. Well, it just builds and builds and builds. And that, speaking of books, another book that had a huge impact on my life is Thinking Body, Dancing Mind. And if you listen to episode, I'm just looking, episode 159 of my podcast, you heard me talking with one of the authors of that book, Dr. Jerry Lynch. And that book, man, like I said, it just had this massive impact on my life. And one of my key takeaways from that book was kind of flipping my goals and objectives from winning, I got to win, that's everything that matters, to simply learning. And it, again, big impact. It changed the way I really looked at things. And when I focused on learning, when that became the objective, when that became my goal, I improved more. And a funny thing happened. I won more. So, again, as a competitive person, that was a very difficult thing for me to do. And, but making learning my objective, that was a big lesson for me. And, it just means learning from every source. I mean, reading, watching videos, talking to people, even some people who perhaps seem like they know less than you. I've had drivers who brought a friend or a spouse to the track, and the friend walked up to them after a practice session and says, wow, that was fun. I went out to a corner and I was watching, and you do this different, that corner different than everybody else does. And even though that person knows nothing about driving, they asked a question, and all of a sudden the driver's going, what's different? And so there's something that could be learned in that case. And so, I guess my advice is, take in as much as you can from everyone and everything. But then be prepared to use a filter. Now, I know this won't come as a massive, big shock to you, but there's stuff on the internet that is not real. It's not accurate. It's not, and some of it is not even worth paying attention to. But check it out, then decide what to keep and what to filter out. I'm going to leave it there. Just, there's some really good stuff out there. There's some stuff that is less than good, but be open to it. To me, the reason why I have this massive, massive bookshelf is because I think books are probably the, it's cheapest source of information you can possibly get. When you can pay $20 for something, read it and learn something from it that can change everything about how you approach something or how you drive or whatever. That's massive. And so be open to it, and obviously keep a growth mindset. Finally, and I guess I'm going to wrap this up because I could go on here as well. As I always say in these episodes or these podcasts, as you know, I think I have a lot of fun doing these podcasts. They're learning opportunities for me. Every guest I've ever had on the podcast, I've learned something from them. Some of them, I agree totally with what they say. Some of them, like, whoa, I don't know if I agree with that, but they've made me think. And that's so critical. And I love that part of it. And that's why I love doing this podcast. But, one of the things, I often say, I think I always say at the end of my podcast, keep learning and having fun. Well, we just talked about learning, having fun. Let me share a quick story here. It was from when I was racing Indy cars, and, I had no money, had a couple of great sponsors, but the budgets just weren't, we were like a tenth of what Penske was spending. And, I barely had enough money to get to the next race, and I could not afford to even put a tiny crack in a front wing because that could be the end of the race for me. And I had made commitments to sponsors to get there. So kind of a lot of pressure, no money, all that kind of stuff. And to be honest, that was 94, I guess it was, the story, and things were looking pretty bleak in terms of the next season. And, it was like, the big breakthrough just wasn't happening. I couldn't get enough sponsors to get to the next level. And I was racing in Detroit, and, at that time it was interesting because a little different than now is they would start 28 cars in an IndyCar race on a road course circuit like that. And we often had 32, 33 cars show up for a race. So the first competition was you had to qualify to even get in the race. Often there'd be like 3, 4, 5 cars that had to go home that didn't even get a chance to start the race. So that was like the first step. And I was driving a two-year-old chassis with about a 3-generation-old engine. And I qualified, I think, 22nd or 21st or 23rd, somewhere in that range. Which, you kind of go, well, whoop-de-doo, in the 20. But what I remember, and this was sort of one of those great kind of feel-good moments in your life, in my life, go to the hotel, and my wife and I, we get into the elevator, and the elevator door is just about to close, and Al Unser Jr. comes running up and hold the door. Al gets in, and I can't remember, he qualified 5th or 6th or 8th or something like that day. And I said, congrats, hope good race tomorrow. And he goes, I saw what you did. Al's words were, I saw what you did in that old car today, and Ayrton Senna would not have gotten more out of your car than you did today. And I was like, holy crap. This is Al Unser Jr., who's won Indy, saying that a couple times and saying this to me. And, it made me feel, put a big smile on my face. Let's just say that. And I kind of, sit in the hotel room that night, just thinking about the pressure of performing and no money and where the results were going, and things weren't looking all that great. And I kind of went, you know what? I'm driving an Indy car. I've dreamt of driving an Indy car since I was like 6, 7, 8 years old. And now I'm driving an Indy car. Holy crap, I'm driving an Indy car. And I just rode in an elevator with Al Unser Jr., who told me that I drove like Ayrton Senna today. Like, how cool is this? I should stop worrying about all this crap and just enjoy it. I should have fun. The next day, I drove one of, if not one of my, well, for sure, one of my best races that I ever drove. And I think it was kind of letting go of the focusing on the result and just going, I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy this. I got to tell you, coming out of a corner on a street circuit like the Detroit Belle Isle race circuit, coming out of that corner there, putting your foot down in an IndyCar with, the best cars had 900 horsepower. I probably had 800 horsepower in a 1,500 pound car. And you put your foot down and the thing squirts out of a corner and you just go, yeah. and you go and you turn into the corner and you go, there is no way this car is going to, oh, it's stuck. You get on the brakes thinking, there's no way I can stop it. Oh, it stopped. Like the performance of those cars is just unbelievable. And here I'm getting the chance to drive this. And I just need to start focusing on it. So I drove better the rest of that season. And, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a phone call from an IMSA prototype team asking me to come and test with them. And I don't know if it was the way of the universe, karma, kind of like me relaxing and just focusing on, I'm just going to have fun and enjoy this, by putting out some waves in the world, that had some IMSA team just randomly out of the blue call me up and say, we'd like you to come and test for us. And it led to me going and racing in IMSA, for the next bunch of years, and getting paid to drive and not having to worry about bringing money or any of that kind of stuff. So when I wrap up a podcast, which I'm about to do, and I say keep learning and having fun, those are the two most important lessons I've ever learned. And that's why I finish off every episode with that. I hope that you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I've been a little hesitant to do this. I've been kind of thinking back in my mind every now and then. I thought, I should try one just on my own just to see how it turned out. But I guess I've been a little reluctant to do it. I don't know if you enjoyed it or not. If you did, drop me a line, let me know. But anyways, I may just try this again at some point, or maybe I'll listen to this and I'll go, man, I'm never doing that again. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. And with that, until next week, keep learning and having fun.
If you are relatively new to the excitement of high-performance driving, Ross has the perfect webinar session for you. It's the 7 Ways to Improve Your Performance Driving webinar, and it's aimed at drivers who are just getting their feet wet. If that's not you, think about someone you know who might benefit from this excellent introduction to HDPE. You'll learn the ideal cornering line, how to practice newly developed driving techniques and skills, what role your mind plays in performance driving, and how to best use the throttle and brake pedals. For example, Ross explains it's not where and how late you are braking for a corner, it's how and where you end your braking. Go to speedsecrets.com/webinars to get 7 ways to improve your performance driving. When you do, it's yours forever, so you can keep on learning.